Hi and welcome. Bright Headed Publishing presents Podiobook Book Club. I'm your host, Kelly Morgan. Today I'm excited to bring you Chapter 3 and 4 of my novel, You Sound White. You Sound White is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online ebook retailers. You can also get it in print. So, let's get right to it. I'm really excited. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4 of You Sound White by Kelly Morgan. Narration by Kelly Morgan. Voices by Marshall Reeves.
I never want to see this type of story for my magazine again.
Sylvia slammed the paper down on her desk.
We don't print shit like this,
she said, standing up. She stared at the girl in front of her. Sylvia enjoyed moments like this, someone cowering in front of her, waiting for her next command. She enjoyed the look of helplessness on the girl's face. She sat down and in a slow and controlled tone said,
Now, Maria, I expect much more from you.
Maria frowned but didn't speak. Sylvia continued,
I've worked very hard to raise the quality and standard of this magazine. There had better not be a next time.
She paused for a moment. Maria stood motionless.
You can go.
Maria nodded her head quickly and left the office. Sylvia then picked up her phone and dialed.
Sharon, we need to talk. In my office now.
She quickly hung up the phone. Moments later, Sharon Eckerson walked into the office.
What is it, Sylvia?
She said, annoyed.
What the hell is this?
She said, handing Maria's article to Sharon. Sharon took the article and quickly scanned it.
What's wrong with it?
Sharon shot Sylvia a surprised look.
What's wrong with it? It's wrong for the magazine.
Sharon sighed.
I asked Maria to do a story on immigrant women being separated from their children at the border. It's a relevant and very important issue, Sylvia.
Sylvia stared at Sharon.
Not in my magazine. I did not approve this. I don't want this sort of thing in my magazine. Our readers do not want to read these type of stories. It's depressing. Minorities are depressing. Sharon.
Sharon bit her lip. Sylvia continued.
You may be editor, but I'm the owner.
Sharon felt herself getting angry.
What do you mean, these types of people?
Sylvia looked at her.
You know exactly what I'm talking about, Sharon. These stories on these illegal aliens are everywhere in the news. I'm supposed to feel sorry for them because they entered my country illegally? I don't think so. I don't want to read about this, and neither do my readers.
Sharon started to speak, but Sylvia spoke first.
Fire Maria.
She said dryly.
Excuse me?
Said Sharon.
Fire her.
Sylvia repeated.
She doesn't fit in. I don't like her. She's always speaking that gibberish. You mean Spanish?
Sharon asked, still trying to comprehend what Sylvia had just told her to do.
Well, we speak English here, Sharon.
Sylvia stood up.
Over the past 4 years, we haven't seen eye to eye on anything. Sharon, you're a good editor. However, you are not my first choice. But here we are. You've done some good things, I will admit. But I'm the one who pushed us to the top. Me, not you. You worked for me. Fire her.
Sylvia sat down. Sharon stood, not saying a word. She opened her mouth to speak, but quickly closed it. After a few moments, she spoke.
Sylvia, you're right. We haven't seen eye to eye on many things. I think adding diversity to the magazine would take it even further. You're excluding millions of potential readers.
Her voice was firm, but she kept her tone low.
I've put a lot of time and effort into growing this magazine. Don't you think our readers want to read more than trends, fluff, and gossip?
Sylvia shot her a cold look.
I don't give a shit about diversity. That's what's wrong with this country. All this so called diversity. Well, I, for one, am tired of hearing about it. If a woman is separated from her child because she enters the country illegally, that's her fault. If a black man is arrested and beat up by the police, he is probably breaking the law. His fault. Now, if I see this shit again, Sharon, we'll have a problem. Now, fire Maria. I want her gone. Her gibberish makes everyone uncomfortable.
Sylvia watched as Sharon walked out of the office.
Unbelievable.
Sylvia yelled. Sylvia had been in charge of You and Me for the past 12 of the 15 years it had been in publication. She'd acquired it from her ex-husband as part of the divorce settlement. The original name had been Chatter, but she changed it after the story on her mother was featured. The magazine had always been profitable, which was all Sylvia cared about. She liked the idea of owning something and made it a point to tell everyone she was the new owner of Chatter. The magazine had made a name for itself by offering up stories of celebrity gossip, fashion trends, exotic travel destinations, makeup tips, and fluff. In the beginning, she didn't care what the magazine published. She was too busy and let her staff handle things. All she cared about was making money and bragging to her fake friends. 2 years after her divorce, her mother died from a drug overdose. She had a deadly mixture of heroin and cocaine in her system and was found nude with a syringe in her arm at a seedy hotel on the outskirts of the city. Sylvia was devastated, not because her mom had died, but because of the circumstances of her death. She would be the talk of her social circle, and she couldn't have that, so she paid several $100,000 to keep the details out of the news. However, someone from her staff at Chatter had received a toxicology report, police report, and pictures of the scene, and the editor of the magazine, Samantha Tallulah, had decided to go with the story. It was an exclusive, and they were going to be the ones to break the story. She didn't bother to let Sylvia know. She said it just slipped her mind. She'd always thought Sylvia was a snobby bitch, and she was about to get her karma. Sylvia, who had been out of the country since her mother's death, had recently returned to the States. She really didn't mourn her mother's death, but thought it would look good if people thought she was mourning. Upon her return to the States, she immediately booked a private cabana at her country club. It was the first time she'd be seen out in public since the funeral. She'd received several condolences and well wishes. The media coverage had been minimal, and there was no mention of the circumstances surrounding her mother's death. Finally, Sylvia decided 2 weeks of not being seen was long enough. So she had to let people know she was back, so she decided to go to the country club to be seen. She was sunning herself on the upper deck in her private cabana when she was suddenly annoyed upon spotting Monica Dancy walking towards her. Monica had been her rival since college. She was everything Sylvia wasn't: kind, caring, and pretty. She dated a boy in college whom Sylvia had eyes for. She hated Monica, and she decided she'd get revenge on her one day. That day came just days before Monica's wedding, when Sylvia slept with Monica's fiance and made sure she'd find them in bed together. When Monica did, Sylvia didn't care. Instead, she laughed and told Monica she was a stupid bitch.
Why would he want someone like you, Monica?
She said.
I mean, look at you. Then look at me, stupid bitch.
Monica married him anyway. Sylvia hated her and enjoyed degrading her whenever she saw her. She took pleasure in Monica's misery. She watched as Monica walked towards her. She thought she was fat and plain looking. Monica was carrying a magazine.
Fat bitch.
Sylvia whispered under her breath and then rolled over onto her stomach so she didn't have to see her.
Knock, knock.
Monica said. Her voice was high and shrill.
Why, Sylvia Bass, you snuck in here without saying hello to me. I'm sorry for your loss. You're in everyone's thoughts and prayers.
Sylvia rolled her eyes in disgust.
Monica, I didn't even know you were here. I thought since your divorce, you wouldn't want to show your face around here. I mean, it's one thing for your husband to leave you for another woman. I mean, we both know he had an appetite you just couldn't satisfy. But it's entirely different when the woman is black. You're so brave.
Sylvia said as she turned over. She had to see the look on Monica's face. Monica didn't speak for a few moments. Her lips were tightly pierced together and she squinted her eyes. She finally spoke.
Well, it couldn't be any more humiliating than what your magazine has published. I had no idea your mother was a drug whore.
She threw the magazine at Sylvia.
I wonder if the apple falls far from the tree.
Monica hissed the words, then turned and left the cabana. Sylvia looked at the magazine. On the cover was a picture of her mother. She was holding a champagne bottle and smoking a cigarette. The cover read, "Rich socialite dies from self-induced heroin cocaine overdose. Found nude in seedy hotel." Sylvia quickly turned the pages until she came to the cover story. There in color was her mother, spread out on the pages of her magazine. She had been humiliated by her own magazine. She had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep this information a secret, and now someone at her magazine had gotten a hold of the information. She continued to read in horror. How could she face her friends? Someone was going to pay for this. She fired the entire staff that day. Everyone. She then became involved in every aspect of the magazine. From then on, it was what she wanted. Anyone who didn't agree, she fired. She changed the name to You and Me. She even graced the cover of the magazine whenever she felt like it. Sylvia was a silver woman with long, volcanic blonde hair. Her long legs were toned, and her body, although not offering many curves, could rival that of a 30-year-old. Her skin was milky white, with just a hint of crow's feet around her eyes. Her cheekbones were high and round, with a hint of color. Her lips were thin. Her teeth were straight and copy paper white. She thought about plastic surgery, but dreaded the idea of someone cutting into her face. So she decided if she couldn't have beauty, her money would make up for it. Sylvia was a no-nonsense type of woman. She didn't like indecision or those who can't focus or take charge. She didn't like foreigners, minorities, or those she thought were on a social lower class. She was raised in the South, and you could slightly hear the Southern accent in certain words. Although she hadn't lived in the South for several decades, she still held on to her Southern beliefs. You didn't mix social classes or races. That had been her mother's way of life, and Sylvia followed suit. Her mother showed her that money could get you whatever you wanted. Her mother wanted drugs, and she used most of her money to buy cocaine and heroin. The poor were meant to be poor and serve the rich. She would never publicly admit this statement, but those who knew her knew all too well how she truly felt. Her attitude was, there's no shame in being poor, as long as you stay in your lane and do the things that poor people do. After she fired her staff, Sylvia decided to rebuild and rebrand Chatter, now called You and Me. After going through several interviews for an editor, she wanted to hire Monique Bastille, who was highly sought after and was young and smart. Sylvia liked her style and thought she'd be perfect for you and me. When Sylvia met Monique at her downtown offices, she thought it was merely to talk about money and close the deal. Sylvia had extended what she thought was a generous offer, but Monique sat quietly and listened as Sylvia's talked about her vision for the magazine and the role she'd play. Then, after several minutes of Sylvia's banter, Monique held up her hand.
Miss Glass, I don't mean to be rude, but I only agreed to meet with you in person so that I can make sure that we understand one another. Your magazine, if that's what you want to call it, is a disgrace to real journalism. You've printed lies, furthered rumors, and even put your own mother on the front cover and sold her tragedy. I have no desire to be a part of your magazine, now or anytime.
Monique stood up.
Thank you for seeing me.
She turned and walked out of the office. Sylvia was dumbfounded. She wasn't sure what had just happened.
Disgrace.
She said out loud. She called her assistant on the intercom. Yes, Miss Blass?
Get me Sandra Grace over at Travel Now.
She yelled into the phone. When Sharon met Sylvia, she'd heard all the stories about the magazine and how Sylvia fired everyone after they ran the story on her mother. She knew it was known for tabloid journalism. Chatter had a reputation for printing stories based on half truths, innuendo, and speculation. Sharon had heard when Sylvia showed up at the magazine's offices, she'd had her editor thrown out into the street. So, when Sandra had told her about the opportunity, Sharon had no intention of meeting with Sylvia. Sharon was sitting in Sandra's office when Sandra brought it up. So, I just had an interesting call with Sylvia Blass, Sandra said. You know, she fired her entire staff, right? Sharon nodded.
I think everyone knows. The story they printed on her mother was tragic. How could she allow them to print those photos? Her own mother.
Sandra stood up, walked over to her office door, and closed it. What I'm about to tell you is between me and you, okay? Sharon turned around in her chair and saw Sandra staring at her. Sandra then lowered her voice. She's shopping for a new editor. Sharon's eyes followed Sandra as she walked back to her desk. I recommended you, Sandra finished. Sharon's eyes widened.
Me? Sandra, you know I don't do tabloid journalism. Too messy for me.
She said, holding up both her hands. I know, Sandra replied, but she's rebuilding and revamping the whole magazine. It's called You and Me. I thought it might be a good opportunity for you. Sharon smiled.
I appreciate the vote of confidence, Sandra, but I've heard horror stories about working with Sylvia Blass. I heard she eats small children and tortures puppies.
Sandra chuckled. Well, that may be, but it pays double what you make now. You'd be the editor. I told her you were good. Maybe you can turn it around. Think of it as a challenge. Sharon stood up.
Look, Sandra, I really appreciate you recommending me, but
Sandra interrupted. She wants to meet with you. Dinner tomorrow, 6 p.m. She's taking you to the dome.
the dome, too rich for my blood.
Sharon said, then started walking toward the door. Sharon, Sandra called after her. Meet with her. Hear her out. You don't have to say yes. Sharon stood at the door for a moment, then turned around.
It sounds like you already set this up.
She said, sounding annoyed. Well, Sylvia really doesn't take no for an answer, Sandra replied. Sharon bit her lip.
Well, Sandra, she may need to get used to hearing it. I'll go, but I'm not working for her.
As she opened the door, Sandra said, "One more thing? Don't take Keith." Sharon spun around.
Why not?
"Just trust me on this one. Meet her alone. Close the door behind you." Sharon walked out of the office and closed the door. When Sharon arrived at the Dome the following evening, she had no idea of what to expect. She'd never been there before, but she heard it was overpriced and very exclusive. She arrived 30 minutes early. Her journalistic instinct had taught her to always be early. She told the hostess she was meeting Sylvia Blass and was immediately led to a table in the rear of the restaurant. The hostess told her it was Sylvia's private table. Sharon sat down. A waiter appeared and she ordered a glass of house red wine. She sipped the wine slowly as she tried to blend into the room. She looked at the table setting. It was formal, more than just a plate, cup, and flatware. She counted 23 pieces in front of her. 3 forks were to the left of the plate, each one a little smaller. She decided the biggest fork was for the salad. To the left of the plate were 3 knives, 2 spoons, and another fork. She was busy deciding which knife she'd use to cut the bread when she spotted Sylvia Blass. She was tall and thin, and her lips were a deep red, which matched the color of her high cheekbones. She was dressed in a lime green dress and black hat, and she held a small black clutch purse. When their eyes connected, Sylvia smiled. Sharon thought it was sort of a sinister looking smile. Sylvia waved and continued to walk towards her. Sharon took another sip of wine and stood up. Sylvia spoke first.
Sharon,
She said.
thank you for meeting me.
Sylvia stretched out her hand, but allowed Sharon to grab only her fingers. She then leaned over and kissed Sharon on both cheeks.
Please sit.
Sylvia said. She snapped her fingers and the waiter quickly presented himself.
Yes, I'll have a glass of the red wine. Not that awful house red.
She paused for a moment.
As a matter of fact, bring the bottle of Chateau La Mission Haute-Brion Bessic 2010.
The waiter's eyes widened. "Very good," he said, and returned and retrieved the wine.
This is excellent wine.
Sylvia said, turning toward Sharon.
Full-bodied, with an amazing palate of firm tannins. You'll love it.
She smiled and lightly touched Sharon's hand. Sharon had no clue about wine. She smiled at Sylvia and shifted in her chair, hoping Sylvia wouldn't ask her opinion. Sylvia smiled.
So, Sharon, I'll get right to the point. I'm looking for a new editor. I've let my staff go. And I'm starting from scratch.
The waiter arrived with the wine, and Sharon watched as he carefully corked the bottle, poured a little into Sylvia's glass, and allowed her to taste it. Sylvia took her time, picking up the glass and holding it up in the light. She gently swirled the wine in the glass and slowly put the rim of the glass up to her nose. She took in a deep breath, taking in the aroma of the wine. She then put the glass to her lips and sipped. After a moment of silence, she said,
Oh, it's simply amazing.
She motioned for the waiter to pour. He moved Sharon's house wine away from her and poured her a new glass of wine. She took a sip.
See?
Sylvia said.
Isn't it just wonderful?
Sharon nodded her head. Sylvia took another sip.
I want to move away from the magazine we've been doing. I'll be honest. I didn't even read it. I acquired it as a part of my divorce settlement.
She lowered her tone.
It wasn't until the unfortunate incident with my mother that I became more vested in the content of You and Me.
Sylvia took a sip of her wine and waited for Sharon to speak. After a few moments, Sharon cleared her throat.
Well, I'm flattered that you're considering me. Well, I've known Sandra for years. You come highly recommended. Shall we order?
Sharon picked up the menu. Her eyes widened when she saw the prices.
The chef is wonderful.
Sylvia said.
I recommend the duck or the veal porterhouse.
She said, closing her menu. The waiter quickly appeared, took their order, and left the table.
Well, Sharon,
Sylvia said.
are you ready to come on board? I'm fully involved in the magazine, but I know nothing about editing, layouts, or any of that. That's why I need a strong editor. I need to hire a writing staff and whatever else is needed. I have a vision. You have the know how.
Sharon shifted in her chair, then looked at Sylvia.
So, what's your vision?
She asked. Sylvia smiled.
Fashion, high fashion. I want to target a certain type of woman. Fashion?
Sharon asked, sounding surprised.
Fashion, makeup, trends, etc.
Sharon took a sip of her wine. She was stalling for time as she chose her words.
Well, Sylvia, it sounds very exciting starting.
Sylvia held up her hand.
Sharon, one thing you don't know about me is that I don't like bullshit. I'm very blunt. I speak my mind. I always have. No need to stop now. I'm making you an offer. Probably the quickest offer you'll ever receive. I'll double your salary. You can start in a week or two. I don't want to leave Sandra in a bind.
She finished her wine, then reached into her clutched purse, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to Sharon.
Here's my offer. I'm sure you'll find it more than generous.
Sharon hesitantly took the envelope, waited a few moments, then opened it. She tried to hide her facial expression. This was more money than she'd ever make as a writer. She'd be able to do so many different things with this type of money. She could feel Sylvia staring at her as she continued to read, then lay down the paper.
This is very generous, Sylvia. I'll need to speak with my husband before making any decisions.
Sylvia looked surprised.
Really? You mean you need to ask your husband before you can take the opportunity of a lifetime? We make all big decisions together.
Sharon replied. Sylvia cocked her head to one side.
I do exactly how I please. It's the only way to live. Family and marriage are definitely overrated. Do you have children too?
Before Sharon could answer, the waiter arrived with their food. Sharon watched him as he served carefully. When he was finished, she replied,
We don't have any children. We're both focused on our careers.
Sylvia smiled.
I never had children. No time. And now my magazine. I'm going to be busy, busy, busy. I do hope you'll join me, Sharon.
As Sharon sat in her office, the memories of her first meeting with Sylvia filled her head. She leaned back into the large leather chair, sat for a moment, then quickly picked up her office phone and dialed her husband, Keith.
Hi, it's me.
She said, her tone low. Hey, you. I was just thinking about you. He replied. Sharon smiled. Just hearing her voice would do that to her.
Remind me again why I took this job.
Sylvia issues? He said.
What else?
she replied.
I don't think I can take much more, Keith. I've worked for this woman for 5 years and
Keith interrupted her. Quit. Sharon paused.
I just might. Today may be the day.
She said, sounding defiant. Keith chuckled. Okay, what happened?
She wants me to fire Maria.
Why? He asked.
Well, she said it's because of the story that she wrote. I told her to write it, but I think it's because she's Mexican. She called Spanish gibberish. Can you believe that? This woman is unbelievable.
Keith was silent. He could hear the frustration in Sharon's voice. I was serious when I said quit, he said. She paused.
Remember the time we were in Costa Rica, the beach?
She smiled. I had sand everywhere. Keith laughed.
I wish we could go there now.
Sharon said sadly. Hey, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do, he said.
I know, it's just, I thought this job would be different. I thought I would be able to create something good, not this bullshit we print.
Your eyes were open, Sharon. You knew what kind of stuff the Dragon Lady wanted to do. Look, whatever you decide, I'll support you. I got you. Sharon took a deep breath.
I know. One day.
She trailed off. Not today, Keith said.
Not, no, not today.
She replied.
I gotta go, babe. I'll see you tonight.
Sharon hung up the phone and then quickly dialed her assistant.
Patty, please tell Maria I need to see her.
Chapter 4. You Sound White.
Come on, Michael. It's a good story.
Tallulah sat folding her arms. She was sitting in his tiny office, trying to make a case for her story idea.
I'm not saying it isn't, but it can't go in this issue, T. I've already completed the layout, and Tony wrote the cover story. You can't write all the covers, T.
Michael replied. She was frowning.
I know, but I was hoping since it's so prevalent in the media, you'd let me squeeze it in. Please, pretty please.
Michael looked at her.
Sorry, next issue. Come on, Michael. Next issue.
He said. Tallulah went back to her desk. Her 1980s phone was ringing. She picked it up.
Tallulah Brock.
Chloe's voice came through the phone line.
Hey, girl. Let's meet up tonight. I've been working like a Hebrew slave in this motherfucker, and I need a motherfucking night out with my girl.
Tallulah smiled.
Okay, Z's place, 11 p.m.
Chloe said.
Cool. I gotta go.
Tallulah clicked off the phone, then laughed.
That girl has issues.
She said out loud. She opened her laptop and quickly scanned her emails. She opened 3 more thank you but no thank you emails and deleted all 3. She checked the time, 10 p.m.
I'm headed out. Make sure you lock up.
Michael said, walking out of his office.
I'm right behind you.
She said, quickly closing her laptop. She grabbed her bag and purse and followed Michael.
Thanks, Zoe, for the pie.
He said, locking the door.
Is that all?
She said slyly, playfully poking at him.
What?
Michael said, turning a little red.
Are you blushing?
She asked.
Look, just tell her thank you.
He said, not sounding amused. Then he looked around.
Do you need a ride? Nah, I like to walk. I got Mace.
She hugged him and watched him walk away, then pulled out her cell phone and texted Zoe. I'm headed your way. Zoe. I've got wine. Tallulah smiled and texted. I need a big glass. Is Chloe coming? Zoe. Yep, she's already here. Eating, of course. Tallulah. Of course. She looked up to see Michael getting in his car, then turned and made the short walk to Zoe's soul food kitchen. When she arrived, she softly knocked on the door of the restaurant. She could hear laughing, then Chloe appeared, smiled at her through the door, unlocked and opened it.
About time your ass got here. Zoe making me hold the next bottle of wine till you get here.
Chloe said, grabbing her arm and pulling her inside. Tallulah gave her a big hug.
Come on, girl. You know Zoe got us in the back.
Chloe turned and walked to the back of the restaurant where Zoe had a table set up with ribs, collard greens, mac and cheese, cornbread, honey butter, and of course, wine.
You made it.
Zoe said, standing up and giving Tallulah a hug. Tallulah looked at all the food on the table.
See, this is how you fatten us up, Zoe. Damn, girl, who are you expecting? What you mean?
Zoe said. Tallulah laughed.
I mean, all of this food. There's enough to feed us, them, and then us again.
Chloe sat down, handing Tallulah an empty wine glass.
Girl, stop complaining and dig in.
Chloe grabbed a rib and took a bite.
Mmm. I love your cooking, Zoe. I really do. These ribs is banging. Pass me the wine.
Tallulah said. She poured herself a full glass, then set down the bottle and noticed both Zoe and Chloe staring at her.
Uh-oh. What's up?
Zoe said.
What do you mean?
Tallulah said, taking a large sip of wine.
I mean, what's with the full glass? What happened? You only drink like this when something's happened.
Tallulah took another gulp of wine and set the glass on the table.
I'm so tired of looking for a job. Every time I open my email, it's rejection, rejection, rejection.
She took another drink of wine. Chloe stopped eating.
You pregnant? Whose is it?
Tallulah shot her a look of disapproval.
No, I'm not pregnant. What are you talking about? I'm serious. Chloe, you have a great job at the firm. Zoe, you have your restaurant. I thought I'd be more established by now.
She sank into the chair.
I'm tired of being rejected. One can only take so much.
She finished her wine and poured another glass. Chloe spoke first.
Bitch, you're a good rider. All those no's ain't rejection. It means something better is coming. Yeah? Well, it better come quick. My rent increased again.
She replied.
How many publications did you contact?
Zoe asked.
A lot. More than I want to admit.
Tallulah replied. The three friends sat in silence for a moment. Then Tallulah looked at Zoe.
I haven't told Michael yet that I'm looking for another job. I was really hoping to freelance part-time. He's talking about cutting back on how often he prints. Right now, the paper comes out monthly, but he may go into every other month.
Chloe looked up.
See, bitch, no one reads magazines anymore. Everything is online. Everything. Hey, look, I'm a PR rep. I'm constantly on social media. I rarely pick up a newspaper or magazine.
She shrugged her shoulders and continued to eat. Tallulah sighed.
What am I going to do? Everything will work out. We got you. You know you aren't going to be homeless.
Zoe said.
I'm willing to write about whatever at this point.
Tallulah sighed.
Michael basically turned down my pitch for the homeless shelter.
Zoe poured the last of the wine into her glass.
The homeless shelter?
Tallulah nodded her head.
Am I the only one who noticed the new shelter was never built? Remember all the talk about the new building and an anonymous donor? Now nothing. Crickets.
Chloe chimed in.
Girl, I can't even walk into my office without someone asking me for money. The other day, a lady sent her little girl up to me. How a bitch gonna say no to a little kid? I had an idea to write about the people who use and depend on the shelter. You know, talk talk with them, get their side of why they're homeless. Really? Aren't we all a paycheck away from being homeless?
Tallulah asked.
Hell no!
Chloe cried.
See, now you tripping. I ain't never gonna be homeless. You should volunteer at the shelter, T. I may give you some. It may give you some perspective. Um, I'm. I started taking food over to Marigold. They could use some help. Besides, it's research.
Zoe said.
You're right.
Tallulah said, pouring another glass of wine.
I should. No, I will. Well, let me tell you about my motherfucking day.
Chloe said.
Oh, here we go.
Says Zoe.
Let me start by saying I'm a professional Black woman. I keeps it moving. Little time for games or bullshit, especially at my job. Why do we need a disclaimer for your story, Chloe?
Zoe asked.
I'm just saying.
Chloe said.
So they hired this new chick, right? Brenda, Tina, whatever the fuck her name is. She all skinny, blind, blue eyes. But that's not the issue. I don't let white girls at my job get me tripping, right? I know how good I am. My clients love me. So anyway, I had to give this report to the team about upcoming stuff, press jackets, press conferences, releases, whatever, right?
Zoe and Tallulah nodded.
So after the meeting, this bitch gonna come into my office and tell me I'm very articulate and I speak very well. What?
Tallulah said.
Yes, bitch. This bitch said I speak very well. So I said, come again? What you mean I speak very well? What did she say?
Zoe asked.
Oh, you know I had to check a bitch. She was like, oh, I mean in front of such a large group. You sounded so professional. I went right into check a bitch mode. I said, I'm not sure what you trying to say, but I'm always professional with my colleagues and clients. That's why I'm the lead consultant. Then she got all flustered, trying to backtrack. She was like, I'm sorry if I offended you. I told that bitch she couldn't offend. Get the fuck out my office.
Chloe paused a moment.
Well, I ain't say that last part. But you get a bitch point. I said that shit with a look. Wow. You know she's scared, right?
Zoe said.
I don't give a fuck. That's some dumb shit to say. That's why we ain't supposed what we ain't supposed to talk good. We ain't educated or some shit like that.
Chloe said.
It's how we as Black women are portrayed in the media and stuff. We're always supposed to be angry, on welfare. Strung out, bunch of badass kids, no job, no nigga.
Tallulah said.
Well, that's some bullshit.
Chloe said. She grabbed her purse and pulled out a blunt.
But we gonna smoke this.
She slid the blunt across her nose and inhaled.
Now this some good shit. It'll help calm my nerves. I wanted to tell that bitch that contrary to popular belief, Black women are smart, educated, strong, and some of us even have a good grasp of the motherfucking English language. I can't stand that stupid shit.
Tallulah laughed.
Did she ask to touch your hair too?
Chloe laughed.
I wish a bitch would.
Zoe jumped up.
Let me get some incense. I don't want this place smelling like weed.
Chloe looked at Tallulah.
You know, I can put my fillers out there and see what's available. You know, my very rich, sexy client, Stanley Roberts, owns a publishing house.
Chloe said, lighting the blunt. She took a deep inhale and blew out the smoke. Tallulah watched as it danced in the air.
Really, Chloe? That would be great. You know, I would never ask.
Chloe inhaled again and blew out the smoke. She passed the blunt to Tallulah, who took it and inhaled, held in the smoke for a few moments, then blew it out.
Bitch, I know. You my girl. I'll always help you. Besides, that'll give me a reason to call him. I told you to wait until I get some incense.
Zoe shouted as she walked towards them. Tallulah passed the blunt to her. She took the blunt and inhaled.
These are the best Friday nights. No club, no niggas, just us.
Tallulah said. Zoe nodded her head and passed the blunt to Chloe, then lit the incense. They sat in silence for a while, smoking the blunt and sipping wine. Jazz music played softly in the background.
Hey, why don't you come with me on Sunday to the shelter? I'm dropping off food and helping out with breakfast. You gotta come early, like 7 a.m.
Zoe said.
Okay.
Said Tallulah.
I didn't know you dropped off food there.
Zoe nodded her head as she looked around at the smoke dancing over their heads.
I just started. This will be my third trip. I didn't want to throw food away. How come you ain't asked me to go?
Chloe said.
Because you, bitch, are not getting up on Sunday morning to give food to the needy.
Zoe said.
A bitch might.
Chloe said. Tallulah and Zoe looked at Chloe, then they all started laughing. Thank you for listening to Bright-Headed Publishing Audiobook Book Club. You've been listening to You Sound White by Kelly Morgan. You can get You Sound White on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in both ebook and print. Next week, we'll be bringing you Chapter 5. Thank you so much, and keep writing.